The escape pod screamed through the atmosphere of Draconis Prime, its hull glowing cherry red as it carved a burning trail across the alien sky. Inside the cramped vessel, emergency systems blared warnings that no one was conscious to hear. The last human colony ship, the New Terra, had been obliterated by the Zephyrian Collective 3 hours ago, and this small pod carried the final remnant of humanity's expansion into the Outer Rim. Captain Sarah Chun had managed to launch the pod with her dying breath, her infant son Marcus sealed within its protective cocoon. The baby's cries were lost in the howl of atmospheric entry as the pod's damaged systems struggled to maintain life support. His parents had sacrificed everything to give him this one chance, this desperate gamble that somewhere in the vast galaxy he might find sanctuary. The pod crashed into the crystalline mountains of Draconis Prime with earth-shaking force, carving a deep gouge through ancient dragon nesting grounds. Steam hissed from the wreckage as exotic metals cooled in the thin mountain air. For several minutes, silence reigned over the crash site, broken only by the whistle of wind through jagged peaks. Then the dragons came. Aurelius the Golden emerged first from his cavern high above, his massive form casting shadows across the mountainside. His scales caught the light of twin suns, each one the size of a dinner plate and gleaming like molten metal. Behind him came others of the ancient race, Crimson Wing Valderus, Stormcaller Thessa, and a dozen more of the last children of fire and sky. They had ruled this world for 10,000 years, their intelligence vast and their memories long. Nothing had disturbed their domain in centuries. The massive golden dragon approached the smoking wreckage with careful steps, his talons clicking against stone. Each footfall could have crushed a vehicle, yet he moved with surprising grace. The scent of burning metal and melted circuits filled his nostrils, along with something else, something organic and fragile and utterly foreign to this world. "What manner of vessel is this?" rumbled Valderus, his crimson scales reflecting the firelight that danced perpetually around his form. The metal speaks of star-crossing, yet the design is crude, inefficient. Not of the Zephyrian make, nor any race we know. Aurelius extended one massive claw toward the pod's sealed hatch. The metal was already weakened by impact and atmospheric burn. With surgical precision, he peeled back the damaged plating like opening a flower. Emergency lights flickered weakly within the pod's interior, illuminating control panels covered in strange symbols and a small chamber marked with warnings in a dozen human languages. The cry that emerged from within the wreckage was unlike anything the dragons had ever heard. It was not the roar of a young predator or the call of a hatchling to its parents. This sound spoke of helplessness, of need, of a creature completely dependent on others for its survival. The dragons recoiled slightly, their ancient minds struggling to process this alien concept. "There is life within," whispered Thessa, her storm-gray scales crackling with barely contained electricity. "But what manner of creature makes such sounds? Is it injured? Dying?" Aurelius reached deeper into the wreckage, his claw moving with incredible delicacy around fragile components and twisted metal. His talon tips were sharp enough to carve stone, yet he handled the unknown cargo with the care of a master jeweler. When he withdrew his claw, something impossible rested in his palm. A human infant, no more than 6 months old, wrapped in thermal blankets and breathing apparatus that had kept him alive during the journey. Marcus Chin looked up at the massive golden eye studying him, his own brown eyes wide with curiosity rather than fear. He had never seen anything like the magnificent creature before him, but his infant mind processed only warmth, safety, and the absence of the terrible sounds that had filled his short life. The dragons stared in stunned silence. In all their long existence, they had never encountered a creature so small, so helpless, so utterly dependent. Their own young hatched with claws and fire, ready to hunt within days of emergence. This tiny being possessed no natural weapons, no apparent defenses, no way to survive on its own. "It is a parasite," declared Valderus with disgust. some manner of creature that relies entirely on others for survival. We should leave it to the mountain winds. Nature will reclaim what cannot stand on its own. But Aurelius continued to study the infant, his ancient mind working through possibilities and precedents. The baby had grasped one of his smaller scales and was examining it with intense concentration, tiny fingers exploring the textured surface. There was something in those eyes, an intelligence, a spark of curiosity that seemed almost familiar. "Look at its eyes," the golden dragon said softly. "There is thought there, awareness. This is no simple beast, but something more. Its vessel crossed the void between stars. Surely it comes from a race of builders, explorers. Tissaes électrical aura fliquer d'incertainly. But why would any race create offspring so helpless? Where are its parents, its guardians? What kind of creature abandons its young to the mercy of strangers?" Aurelius examined the wreckage more carefully, his enhanced senses picking up traces of battle damage, scorch marks from energy weapons, the acrid smell of explosive decompression. The pod's databanks were mostly destroyed, but fragments of information flickered across damaged displays. Images of space battles, fleeing ships, the last desperate moments of a dying civilization. "They did not abandon it," he said with growing understanding. "They saved it. This vessel is not a transport, but an ark, carrying the last hope of a dying race across the galaxy to find sanctuary." The infant had fallen asleep in the dragon's palm, lulled by warmth and the steady rhythm of the great heart beating in the chest above him. His small face was peaceful, trusting, utterly vulnerable. Around the crash site, the other dragons murmured among themselves, their voices like distant thunder echoing off the mountain peaks. "We cannot simply leave it here," said Meridian the Wise, her silver scales dulled by countless centuries. "Regardless of its nature, it lives, it thinks. To abandon it would be to become no better than the void hunters who destroyed its people." "But what would we do with it?" asked Emperai Karath, his orange scales flickering like a banked fire. "We know nothing of its needs, its nature. How does it feed? How does it grow? How does it learn?" Aurelius looked down at the sleeping infant, remembering ancient stories passed down through draconic generations. Tales of the first dragons, how they had been small once, how they had needed the protection of their elders to survive in a hostile galaxy, how the greatest strength sometimes came from the most unlikely sources. "We learn," he said simply. "We study, we adapt, we teach. This creature may be small and helpless now, but its people built vessels that cross the void. Its mind may hold knowledge we have never imagined. Perhaps in saving it, we save something precious that should not be lost from the galaxy." The debate continued as the twin suns moved across the sky, but gradually the dragons reached consensus. They would take the infant to the great cavern, the heart of their mountain stronghold. They would study its needs and provide for them as best they could. They would raise it as one of their own, teaching it the ways of dragons while learning from it the mysteries of its own vanished people. As Aurelius carefully carried the sleeping baby toward the cavern entrance, neither he nor any of his kin could have imagined what they had truly found in the wreckage. Marcus Chun carried within his DNA the genetic heritage of a species that had survived ice ages, world wars, plagues, and the hostile void of space through sheer determination and adaptability. He bore the cultural memory of a race that had never known when to quit, never accepted defeat as final, never stopped believing that tomorrow could be better than today. The dragons thought they were saving an orphan child. In reality, they had just adopted the future savior of the galaxy. The great cavern of the dragons was a marvel of natural architecture, carved by millennia of dragon fire and patience into the heart of the mountain. Crystal formations provided soft light that never dimmed, and heated pools of mineral water maintained perfect temperature throughout the vast space. It had served as home to the dragon clans for thousands of years, a place where knowledge was preserved and wisdom was passed from generation to generation. Marcus grew his first year, surrounded by creatures of myth and legend, his infant eyes tracking the movement of beings that could have been gods in any human pantheon. Aurelius became his primary guardian, the golden dragon's patient nature perfectly suited to caring for such a fragile charge. The great dragon learned to modulate his voice to avoid frightening the baby, to control his fire so that it provided warmth without danger, to move with infinite care around the tiny human. The other dragons contributed their own expertise to the strange project of raising an alien child. Thessa used her mastery of electricity to power the pod's remaining life support systems, keeping them functional long enough to understand their purpose. Meridian translated the human symbols found throughout the wreckage, slowly piecing together fragments of language and meaning. Valdris, despite his initial objections, proved surprisingly adept at preparing food suitable for human consumption, his precise control of flame perfect for heating the emergency rations they had salvaged. As Marcus grew from infant to toddler, his differences from dragon young became increasingly apparent. Where dragon hatchlings developed rapidly, gaining size and strength with each passing week, the human child remained small and vulnerable for what seemed like an impossibly long time. Yet what he lacked in physical development, he made up for in curiosity and adaptability that amazed his guardians. The child learned to walk not on the smooth floors of a human habitat, but on the rough stone surfaces of dragon caverns. His first words were not human baby talk, but attempt to mimic the harmonic frequencies of dragon speech. He learned to judge temperature by the color of dragon fire, to read emotional states in the subtle shifts of scale coloration, to navigate by the acoustic properties of vast underground spaces. Most remarkably, he showed no fear of the dragons. Where any other creature might have been terrified by beings of such immense size and power, Marcus treated them as family. He would sleep curled against Aurelius's warm side, play games with Thessa's controlled lightning, and listen with rapt attention to the ancient stories Meridian told in her resonant voice. The dragons, in turn, found themselves changed by their unusual ward. They had lived for centuries in routine patterns, their great minds focused on philosophical contemplation and the preservation of ancient knowledge. Caring for Marcus forced them to see their world through new eyes, to consider questions they had never thought to ask. Why did they breathe fire when they could communicate perfectly well without it? Why did they hoard treasure when they had no need of wealth? Why did they isolate themselves from other races when interaction might bring new perspectives and knowledge? The innocent questions of a developing mind challenged assumptions they had held for millennia. By his third year, Marcus was speaking fluent dragon tongue, his human vocal cords somehow adapting to produce the complex harmonics required for full communication. He could predict weather patterns by reading the electrical charges in Thessa's scales, understand geological formations through the vibrations Aurelius could feel through the mountain stone, and identify the emotional states of dragons through subtle cues no other race had ever learned to interpret. But it was his human heritage that truly began to shine as he grew older. While dragons planned their actions across decades and centuries, Marcus lived with an urgency that drove rapid innovation and problem-solving. When he wanted something, he didn't wait for the proper contemplative period. He immediately began experimenting with ways to achieve it. He built his first tool at age 4, a simple lever made from salvaged metal that allowed him to reach high shelves in the food storage caverns. The dragons were amazed not by the tool itself, which was crude by their standards, but by the speed with which he had conceived, designed, and constructed it. What had taken him mere hours would have required months of deliberation in dragon culture. As Marcus entered his 5th year, his adoptive family began to understand that they were raising something unprecedented in galactic history. He possessed the ancient wisdom and patience they had taught him, but combined it with a human drive for innovation and progress that created entirely new possibilities. He was becoming something the galaxy had never seen before, a bridge between species, a synthesis of the best qualities of multiple races. The boy who had arrived as a helpless refugee was growing into something extraordinary. The dragons had saved his life, but In the process, they had created the being who would one day save them all. In the peaceful depths of the mountain stronghold, with war raging across distant stars and ancient evils stirring in the void between worlds, the future of the galaxy was learning to walk among dragons and dream of tomorrow. 10 years had passed since the crash on Draconis Prime, and Marcus Chun stood at the edge of the great precipice, watching the twin suns set over the crystalline peaks that had become his world. At 15, he had grown tall and lean, his human frame adapted to the low-gravity environment of the mountain heights. His brown hair caught the evening light as he studied the tactical display projected from his wrist device, a piece of dragon technology he had modified with salvaged human components. The display showed troubling information gathered from the dragon's deep space monitoring network. The Zephyrian Collective, the same alien empire that had destroyed his birth parents and their colony ship, was expanding its territory at an alarming rate. Entire star systems were falling under their control, their inhabitants enslaved or eliminated according to the whims of Zephyrian military commanders. "The pattern is accelerating," Marcus said to Aurelius, who stood beside him like a golden mountain. 37 systems conquered in the past year alone. They're not just expanding randomly. There's a strategy here, a purpose. The ancient dragon rumbled thoughtfully, his great head turning to study the data with eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations. "The Zephyrians have always been conquerors, young Marcus. But you are correct. This expansion lacks their usual careful deliberation. Something drives them to move faster than their nature would normally permit." Marcus manipulated the display, highlighting patterns in the Zephyrian advance. His human brain, trained by dragon tutors, but thinking with human speed and innovation, could see connections that might take the dragons months to process through their careful analytical methods. "Look at the trajectory," he said, pointing to a convergence of attack vectors. "They're not just conquering territory, they're moving towards something specific." Thessa materialized beside them with a crackle of displaced air, her mastery of electromagnetic fields allowing her to travel through the mountain's conductive crystal networks. Her storm gray scales flickered with agitation as she shared her latest intelligence. The outer monitoring stations report massive Zephyrian fleet movements toward the Andronis sector. Fleet compositions suggest not conquest operations, but excavation and research activities. The young human's mind raced, connecting fragments of information into a coherent picture. During his years in the Dragon Archives, he had studied not just dragon history, but the fragmented records of dozens of extinct civilizations. One name surfaced from those ancient texts, associated with warnings written in a dozen dead languages. "The Andronis sector," he whispered, his blood turning cold. "That's where the architects built their final project before their civilization collapsed. The Void Engine." Aurelius's golden scales dimmed with concern. The architects had been the most advanced race in galactic history, masters of technology that could reshape reality itself. Their sudden disappearance 15,000 years ago remained one of the great mysteries, leaving behind only ruins and warnings about the dangers of their most ambitious creation. "The Void Engine was sealed for good reason," Meridian said as she approached, her silver scales reflecting the last light of the setting suns. "The architects themselves declared it too dangerous to use, too terrible to destroy. They built their tombs around it and wrote warnings in every language they knew." Marcus turned back to his display, pulling up fragmentary records from the Dragon Archives and cross-referencing them with the pattern of Zephyrian movements. The picture that emerged was terrifying in its implications. The Zephyrians aren't just conquering territory. They're gathering resources and slave labor for a massive excavation project. They're going to dig up the Void Engine. The dragons exchanged glances that spoke volumes in the silent communication of their species. They had remained neutral in galactic conflicts for centuries, content to preserve knowledge and wisdom in their mountain strongholds while younger races fought and died in the void. But The Void Engine represented a threat to all life in the galaxy. If the Zephyrians gained control of architect technology, Valdris said grimly, no force in the galaxy could oppose them. They would have the power to unmake worlds, to reshape space, and time according to their will. Marcus stared out at the peaceful vista of his adopted home world, imagining it consumed by the reality-warping energies of architect weapons. Everything he loved, everyone who had raised him and taught him and protected him would be helpless against such power. The dragons who had saved an orphaned human baby would watch their world burn along with all the others. But Marcus Chun was not just any human. He was a human raised by dragons, taught their patience and wisdom, but retaining the innovative drive and adaptability of his birth species. As the dragons debated the implications of the Zephyrian threat in their slow, careful way, his mind was already racing ahead to potential solutions. We have to stop them, he said simply. Not just warn other races or hope someone else takes action. We have to actively prevent them from reaching the Void Engine. The dragons looked at him with a mixture of affection and concern. Fessa's scales flickered with protective energy as she spoke. You have the heart of a warrior, Little Star's son, but the Zephyrian Collective commands fleets that number in the thousands. Even if all the free races united against them, victory would be far from certain. Marcus smiled, and in that expression the dragons saw something that reminded them of Dragon Fire, bright, dangerous, and utterly unstoppable once ignited. Then, we don't fight them fairly. We don't meet their fleets in open battle, or try to match their numbers. We fight them the way humans have always fought when facing impossible odds. We cheat. Over the following weeks, Marcus threw himself into research with an intensity that amazed even his dragon mentors. He studied every fragment of information about architect technology, Zephyrian military doctrine, and the strategic situation in the threatened sectors. His human brain, enhanced by dragon training, but unconstrained by their methodical thought processes, made connections and leaps of logic that opened entirely new possibilities. The solution he proposed was audacious beyond anything the dragons had ever considered. Rather than attempting to defeat the Zephyrian fleets, Marcus suggested a surgical strike directly at their leadership during the excavation of the Void Engine. Using a combination of dragon stealth technology and human tactical innovation, a small team could infiltrate the dig site and prevent the activation of architect systems. Impossible, declared Karath, his orange scales dimming with skepticism. The Zephyrians will have the dig site protected by entire battle fleets. No force could penetrate such defenses. Marcus pulled up his modified displays, showing trajectory calculations and energy pattern analyses that had taken him days to complete. Not impossible, just requiring a level of precision that no one has attempted before. The dragons have cloaking technology that can hide individual ships, but you've never tried to hide an entire strike force during a combat operation. He highlighted specific points in space around the Andronis sector, showing how gravitational fields and stellar phenomena could be used to mask approach vectors. Human ships are smaller, more maneuverable than dragon vessels. If we modify them with your cloaking systems and use micro-jumps through hyperspace, we can get close enough to the dig site to deploy infiltration teams. Aurelius studied the plans with growing amazement. His ward had not just conceived a strategy for reaching the Void Engine. He had designed a completely new form of warfare that combined dragon technology with human tactics in ways neither race had imagined. The technical challenges alone would require years to overcome. The Golden Dragon said thoughtfully, "Not if we stop thinking like dragons." Marcus replied with the enthusiasm of youth combined with the wisdom of his unusual education. Dragons plan for decades because you have decades to spare. Humans plan for hours because that's all we've ever had. The Zephyrians will reach the Void Engine in 6 months, so we have 6 months to build, train, and deploy. The debate that followed echoed through the mountain strongholds for days. Ancient dragons who had not left their homes in centuries argued the merits of intervention versus isolation. Some advocated warning other races and hoping they could organize effective resistance. Others suggested hiding deeper in the mountains and hoping the coming storm would pass them by. But Marcus had been raised among dragons, and he understood their psychology better than any outsider ever could. He knew that beneath their careful deliberation and philosophical detachment lay the same protective instincts that had led them to save an orphaned human infant. They were not truly contemplating whether to act, but how to act while maintaining their honor and wisdom. The turning point came when Meridian shared intelligence from the outer monitoring stations. The Zephyrian advance had accelerated beyond all previous projections. They were strip mining entire worlds for rare minerals needed in their excavation, enslaving populations by the billion, and destroying any resistance with casual brutality. The careful expansion of a disciplined empire had become the rampage of fanatics driven by visions of ultimate power. They will not stop with the Void Engine, Meridian said in the resonant tones that carried absolute certainty. Once they possess architect technology, they will use it to reshape the galaxy according to their vision. Every free world, every independent race, every pocket of resistance will be crushed or converted, including us. That night, Marcus stood again at the great precipice, but this time he was not alone. Around him stood the greatest dragons of their age, warriors, scholars, engineers, and philosophers who had decided that some threats were too great to face with neutrality. They had chosen to trust in a plan conceived by the human child they had raised, to risk everything on the belief that wisdom and innovation together could overcome raw power. Aurelius placed one massive claw gently on Marcus's shoulder, the gesture carrying all the love and pride of a father for his adopted son. Your parents sent you across the void to find sanctuary among us, the golden dragon said. Instead, you have found a purpose that may save us all. The galaxy is about to discover what happens when human determination is backed by dragon wisdom. Marcus looked out at the stars that had once seemed impossibly distant, now appearing as close as his next heartbeat. Somewhere out there, the Zephyrian Collective was digging into the grave of an ancient civilization, seeking power that should never again see the light of distant suns. In 6 months, they would learn that the small human they had inadvertently created was coming for them. The boy who had been found in the wreckage of humanity's last hope was about to become the galaxy's first. The shipyards of Draconis Prime had not seen such activity in over 1,000 years. Deep within the mountain's industrial caverns, dragon fire shaped exotic metals, while human ingenuity guided their transformation into something the galaxy had never witnessed before. Marcus stood on the observation deck, watching as his impossible dream took physical form in the fusion of two civilizations' greatest achievements. The vessels being constructed bore little resemblance to traditional dragon or human designs. Where dragon ships were massive and elegant, built for long voyages and ceremonial display, and human vessels had been compact and utilitarian, designed for speed and efficiency, these new hybrid craft embodied entirely different principles. Each ship was small enough for rapid maneuvering, but incorporated dragon cloaking technology that could bend light and energy around their hulls. They carried human-designed weapon systems that fired bursts of concentrated dragon flame, and their hulls were forged from crystalline composites that could absorb and redirect enemy fire. The quantum resonance chambers are calibrated, reported Thessa, her electrical field interfacing directly with the ship's control systems. Each vessel can maintain full stealth for up to 6 hours while under acceleration. The power requirements are enormous, but the crystal matrices can handle the load. Marcus nodded, his attention focused on the tactical display showing the fleet's projected performance characteristics. 6 months of nonstop work had produced 12 ships. Not the massive armada that traditional military thinking would require, but a precisely crafted force designed for a single, impossible mission. "What word from our scouts in the Andronis sector?" he asked Valdris, who had volunteered to coordinate intelligence operations despite his earlier skepticism about the plan. The Crimson Dragon's scales flickered with grim satisfaction. The Zephyrian excavation proceeds ahead of schedule. They have stripped 3 worlds bare to fuel their operation, and their slave armies number in the hundreds of millions. The dig site itself is protected by over 2,000 capital ships in defensive formation. Marcus studied the intelligence reports with eyes that had learned to see patterns in chaos. The Zephyrian operation was vast, but its very size created vulnerabilities that a smaller, more agile force could exploit. They're thinking like conquerors, not archaeologists, he observed. All that firepower is positioned to repel external attack, but they're not prepared for infiltration during the excavation itself. The past months had transformed Marcus from a curious teenager into something approaching a military genius, though his methods bore little resemblance to conventional military thought. Where traditional commanders moved armies like game pieces across a strategic board, Marcus thought of warfare as a three-dimensional puzzle requiring creativity more than force. His dragon tutors had taught him patience and long-term thinking, but his human heritage provided the adaptability to change plans instantly as circumstances demanded. The strike force he had assembled reflected this hybrid philosophy. Each ship would carry a crew of 3, one dragon pilot whose patient nature could handle the complex requirements of stealth flight, one human warrior technician capable of rapid problem-solving under combat conditions, and one Valdoran crystal singer whose empathic abilities could coordinate the team without electronic communications that might be detected. The Valdorans had been the third race to join their alliance, refugees from a world the Zephyrians had conquered 6 months earlier. Their unique ability to communicate through controlled quantum resonance had made them invaluable to resistance movements throughout the galaxy, and their bitter hatred of Zephyrian slavery had made them eager volunteers for Marcus's seemingly suicidal mission. The volunteers are ready for final training exercises, Aurelius announced as he entered the command center, his golden bulk somehow navigating the human-scaled corridors without difficulty. The greatest dragons had learned to modulate their size and presence when working in close quarters with their smaller allies, another adaptation that amazed those who knew their traditionally formal nature. Marcus turned from the tactical displays to address his gathered allies. Dragons, humans, and Valdorans worked side by side throughout the command center, their cooperation a living example of what the galaxy could become if the Zephyrian threat could be eliminated. "Today we test everything," he said simply. "The ships, the stealth systems, the coordination protocols, and our ability to work as one force despite our different natures." The training exercise that followed pushed every system and every individual to their absolute limits. The hybrid fleet launched from hidden bays deep within the mountain, their cloaked forms invisible to every sensor the dragons possessed. They navigated a course through the asteroid fields surrounding Draconis Prime, avoiding detection while coordinating a simulated assault on a heavily defended position. Marcus flew in the lead ship alongside Aurelius, and a young Valdoran named Harmony, whose crystal song could maintain perfect communication links across impossible distances. As they wove through the asteroid field at velocities that would have been suicide for traditional vessels, he felt the exhilaration of commanding technology that exceeded the capabilities of anything in galactic history. Zephyrian patrol simulation detected. Harmony sang in the crystalline tones that bypassed all electronic eavesdropping. Vector 77 Mark III. Scanning pattern suggests routine sweep. Marcus smiled grimly as he fed targeting data to the fleet through the quantum link. "All ships, prepare for engagement test. Remember, we're not trying to destroy them, just prove we can strike without being detected." What followed would have been impossible for any conventional force to achieve. The cloaked ships separated into attack formations that used the asteroids themselves as both cover and weapons, their dragon fire cannons turning space rocks into guided projectiles that struck the simulated enemy patrol with devastating precision. The entire engagement lasted less than 30 seconds, ending with the complete destruction of the simulated Zephyrian force without any of the hybrid ships being detected or targeted. "Incredible," breathed Captain Sarah Morrison, one of the human volunteers who had emerged from refugee camps to join Marcus's cause. She had lost her entire family to Zephyrian raids and possessed the cold fury of someone who had nothing left to lose. I've never seen anything move like that. The way you use the asteroids as both cover and ammunition, it's like the entire battlefield became part of your weapon. Marcus nodded, but his expression remained focused on the larger picture. This was easy compared to what we'll face at the dig site. There, we'll be operating in a gravity well, surrounded by millions of enemies, with no room for error and no chance for retreat. The weeks of training that followed refined their capabilities to levels that surprised even Marcus. The hybrid crews learned to think and act as single organisms, their different species' strengths combining to create tactical advantages no one had imagined possible. Dragon patience allowed for perfect timing, human adaptability enabled instant course corrections, and Valderan empathy kept the entire force coordinated without detectable communications. But even as their tactical capabilities reached unprecedented heights, troubling news continued to arrive from the Andronis sector. The Zephyrian excavation had reached the outer chambers of the Architect ruins, and their first contact with ancient technology had produced results that terrified even the dragon's vast experience. They activated a minor control system, Meridian reported, her silver scales dark with foreboding. The energy release was detectable from 3 star systems away. If they succeed in reaching the void engine itself, the consequences could cascade across half the galaxy. Marcus studied the latest intelligence while his mind raced through possibilities and contingencies. The Zephyrians were moving faster than anyone had anticipated, driven by initial discoveries that proved the legends about architect technology were understated rather than exaggerated. They now had weeks rather than months before the galaxy faced a threat unlike anything in recorded history. "We launch tomorrow," he announced to the assembled force. "The ships are ready, the crews are trained, and our window of opportunity is closing rapidly. Once the Zephyrians penetrate deeper into the Architect's systems, they'll be too powerful for any force to stop." That evening, Marcus walked through the Great Cavern one final time, visiting the places where he had grown from helpless infant to the leader of an impossible alliance. He found Aurelius in the archives where the Golden Dragon had first taught him to read the ancient texts, his massive form somehow fitting comfortably among the crystal shells that held the wisdom of ages. "Do you ever wonder," Marcus asked quietly, "what my birth parents would think if they could see what their son has become?" Aurelius turned his great head to study the young human who had grown up in the shadow of his wings. "I think they would be proud beyond words. They sent you into the void hoping you might survive. Instead, you have become hope itself for everyone who refuses to bow to tyranny." Marcus smiled, feeling the weight of responsibility settle around him like armor forged from determination and love. Tomorrow he would lead 12 small ships against the greatest military force the galaxy had ever seen, attempting to prevent an apocalypse through precision and audacity where brute force would certainly fail. "Will you tell me again," he asked, "about the day you found me in the wreckage?" The ancient dragon's voice took on the warm tones he had used for bedtime stories when Marcus was small, weaving the familiar tale of a crashed escape pod and an infant who showed no fear of creatures that should have terrified him. It was a story of unlikely rescue and impossible adoption, of 2 species learning from each other and growing stronger together. As Aurelius spoke, Marcus understood that tomorrow's mission was not really about saving the galaxy from the Zephyrian collective, though that was certainly important. It was about proving that the bonds between different species, the love that could exist across any divide, and the courage to stand up for what was right could overcome any force in the universe. The boy who had been found among the stars was about to return to them, carrying with him everything his dragon family had taught him about wisdom, patience, and the strength that comes from unity. The Zephyrians had spent years preparing to claim the ultimate weapon. They had no idea they were about to face the ultimate warrior, a human raised by dragons, fighting not for conquest, but for the right of all free beings to shape their own destiny. The final battle for the galaxy's future would begin at dawn. The Andronis sector blazed with the fires of industry as the Zephyrian Collective's massive excavation operation consumed worlds to feed their ambition. Marcus stared at the tactical display from the bridge of his lead ship, the Dragon's Heart, as they approached the edge of the asteroid field that marked the beginning of enemy space. Before them stretched a vista of controlled destruction that dwarfed anything in galactic history. Hundreds of massive factory ships processed the dismantled remains of 3 planets, their automated systems converting raw materials into the specialized equipment needed for archaeological excavation on an unprecedented scale. Millions of slave workers labored under the harsh light of artificial suns, their various species united only in their hopeless servitude to Zephyrian ambition. And, at the center of it all, the dig site itself. A wound in space-time where reality bent around technologies that predated most civilizations. Energy readings are off the scale, reported Harmony, her crystalline voice tight with barely controlled fear. The young Valdoran's empathic abilities were picking up the psychic resonance of millions of suffering beings, but also something far worse, the alien whispers of architect technology beginning to awaken after 15,000 years of slumber. Aurelius shifted carefully in his scaled-down form, his golden eyes studying the enemy fleet disposition with the patience of centuries. 2,307 capital ships in defensive formation, with escort vessels numbering in the tens of thousands. They have truly committed everything to this endeavor. Marcus nodded grimly as he highlighted specific targets on the display. The Zephyrian fleet was arranged in concentric spheres around the dig site, each layer designed to provide overlapping fields of fire against any approaching threat. It was a formation that could repel the combined fleets of a dozen star systems, but it had one critical weakness. It assumed any attack would come from outside. Stealth systems to full power, Marcus commanded, his voice carrying across the quantum communication links to the other 11 ships of their tiny fleet. We're going through, not around. What followed was a display of precision flying that would have been impossible without the unique training their crews had undergone. The hybrid ships slipped through gaps in the Zephyrian formation that existed only in the mathematics of overlapping sensor fields. Their cloaking systems bent to their absolute limits by the gravitational distortions surrounding the dig site. Marcus felt sweat beating his forehead as they passed within kilometers of massive Zephyrian dreadnoughts, their hulls crackling with enough firepower to sterilize continents. Detection would mean instant annihilation. Their small fleet could never survive a direct confrontation with even a fraction of the enemy force. But the Dragon technology held, bending light and energy around their ships while human reflexes guided them through spaces barely large enough for their passage. Contact with perimeter defenses in 30 seconds. Harmony sang softly, her crystal song conveying targeting data and tactical updates without the electronic signatures that might betray their presence. Automated defense platforms have been positioned to cover all conventional approach vectors. Marcus smiled coldly as he studied the defensive arrangement. The Zephyrians had done exactly what he had expected. They had protected against the kind of massive frontal assault that traditional military doctrine would require. They had not prepared for an attack that came from directly above the dig site itself, using the excavation's own energy output to mask the approach of intruders. All ships, prepare for vertical insertion, he commanded. Remember, once we're inside the perimeter, stealth becomes secondary to speed. We need to reach the architect chambers before they can organize a response. The dive toward the dig site was like falling into the heart of an industrial nightmare. The excavation stretched for hundreds of kilometers in every direction, its depths disappearing into artificial caverns that glowed with the eerie light of awakening technology. Millions of workers swarmed over massive earth-moving machines, their efforts directed by Zephyrian overseers who drove them with casual brutality toward ever deeper penetration of the ancient ruins. But it was what lay at the bottom of the excavation that made Marcus's breath catch in his throat. The architect ruins were not dead relics of a vanished civilization. They were awakening, responding to Zephyrian intrusion with patterns of energy that spoke of intelligence vast and alien. Crystalline structures that had been dark for millennia now pulsed with rhythmic light, and the very air around them shimmered with distortions that suggested reality itself was becoming unstable. Void engine chamber located, reported Captain Morrison from the second ship, her voice tight with controlled fear. Zephyrian excavation teams are less than 50 meters from the primary containment field. At their current rate of progress, they'll breach the chamber in less than 4 hours. Marcus felt time compress around him as he absorbed the implications. They had arrived at the absolute edge of disaster. Any later, and the Zephyrians would have gained access to technology that could remake the galaxy according to their vision. All ships, emergency deployment protocol, he commanded. We're going in hot. The assault that followed was unlike anything in the history of galactic warfare. 12 small ships diving directly into the heart of an excavation defended by millions of enemies. Their success dependent entirely on surprise, precision, and the hope that they could reach critical objectives before overwhelming forces could respond. Marcus's ship led the way, its dragon-forged hull absorbing energy blasts from automated defenses, while its modified weapon systems carved through Zephyrian positions with surgical precision. Behind him, the other ships of Strike Force spread out to hit multiple objectives simultaneously. Power generators that fed the excavation equipment, command centers that coordinated the slave labor, and, most critically, the access tunnels that led to the architect chambers themselves. Harmony established communication with the slave populations. Marcus ordered as they dove toward the tunnel entrance leading to the void engine chamber. Tell them in every language you know, the moment they see our signal, they need to sabotage everything they can reach. The young Valdoran's crystal song changed frequency, broadcasting on wavelengths that could penetrate directly into the minds of every empathic species in the excavation. Her message was simple but devastating. Hope had arrived, and freedom was possible for those brave enough to seize it. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Across the entire dig site, millions of enslaved beings who had labored in hopeless servitude suddenly turned on their oppressors with improvised weapons and desperate courage. Excavation equipment exploded as workers sabotaged their own machinery. Power grids failed as maintenance crews cut critical connections, and command structures collapsed as guards found themselves facing uprisings on every level. Marcus's ship reached the tunnel entrance just as the first Zephyrian fighters began to respond to the assault. Dragon fire met alien energy weapons in a display that lit the excavation like an artificial star, while Aurelius guided their craft through passages barely wide enough for their passage. Behind them, the sounds of battle echoed through tunnels that had been silent for 15 millennia. The architect chambers were a maze of crystalline corridors and impossible geometries, their surfaces covered with symbols that seemed to shift and change when viewed directly. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows as Marcus and his small team made their way toward the heart of the complex, following readings on modified sensors that could barely interpret the alien technology around them. The void engine is active, Harmony reported, her voice filled with terror as her empathic abilities detected the awakening intelligence within the ancient device. Something is responding to the Zephyrian intrusion, something that has been waiting for a very long time. They rounded a final corner and found themselves face to face with the most terrifying sight in galactic history. The void engine chamber stretched away into impossible distances, its walls covered with machinery that defied every law of physics. At its center stood a sphere of absolute darkness, surrounded by rings of spinning crystal that generated energies beyond measurement. And, standing before the control console, his hands already reaching toward the activation controls, was Supreme Commander Vaxhai, the architect of Zephyrian expansion and the being responsible for the enslavement of countless worlds. The Zephyrian leader turned as they entered, his insectoid features twisted into an expression of triumph and madness. "Too late, mammals," he hissed in the multi-tonal language of his species. The power of the architects is mine to command. With it, I will remake the galaxy into the perfect order my people deserve. Marcus stepped forward, his human form dwarfed by the alien technology around him, but radiating a confidence that made even the Supreme Commander hesitate. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," he said quietly. The architects didn't disappear. They were consumed by their own creation. "That's not a weapon you're trying to activate. It's a trap." For a moment, Vaxhai paused, his compound eyes reflecting uncertainty. Around them, the crystalline machinery pulsed with increasing intensity as ancient systems responded to the proximity of living beings. The very air began to shimmer with distortions that suggested reality was becoming unstable. "Lies," the Zephyrian snarled, his hand moving toward the activation controls. "My researchers have studied these systems for months. This device will give me dominion over space and time itself." Marcus smiled, and in that expression Vaxhai saw something that made his alien blood run cold. The absolute certainty of someone who had studied the same texts but understood their true meaning. "Your researchers were working from incomplete data," the young human said as he began moving slowly toward the control console. "I've had access to the complete architect archives, including their final warnings. That machine doesn't grant power over reality. It consumes reality to feed something that should never have been created." The battle that followed was not fought with weapons or energy blasts, but with knowledge and, well, as two beings raced to control technology that could unmake worlds. Vaxhai's hand reached the activation controls just as Marcus lunged forward, their struggle taking place mere inches from devices that could tear holes in the fabric of space itself. Around them, the Void engine began to awaken in response to their proximity, its dark heart pulsing with energies that predated most stars. The fate of the galaxy hung in the balance as the boy raised by dragons fought for the future of all free beings against the ambitions of an empire that knew only conquest. The final confrontation for the galaxy's soul had begun. The Void engine chamber filled with a sound like reality, tearing as ancient systems activated for the first time in 15,000 years. Marcus grappled with Supreme Commander Vaxhai, mere inches from the control console, their desperate struggle taking place in the shadow of technology that could reshape existence itself. Around them, crystalline machinery that had slumbered since the fall of the architect's civilization began to pulse with energies that made the air itself burn with possibility. "You understand nothing," Vaxhai screamed as his clawed hand reached toward the primary activation controls. "This power belongs to those strong enough to claim it. The galaxy will bow before the collective, or it will be remade to ensure compliance." Marcus twisted desperately, his human reflexes enhanced by years of training under Dragon Masters. But the Zephyrian's alien strength was gradually overwhelming him. Behind them, Harmony's crystal song filled the chamber with harmonic frequencies that somehow held the awakening systems in check. But the young Valdoran's efforts were clearly reaching their limits. "Marcus," she gasped through her song, "the resonance patterns are cascading. I cannot maintain harmony much longer." The young human's mind raced through everything he had learned in the Dragon Archives, seeking some solution to an impossible situation. The Void engine was not just a weapon, but a trap created by the architects as their final act of desperation when they realized their civilization was doomed. It fed on sentient thought, growing stronger with each mind it consumed, until it could reshape reality according to its alien hunger. But in that moment of crisis, Marcus remembered something else from the ancient texts, a single line written in the flowing script of the architect mathematicians. "The engine fears only that which it cannot consume. The love between species, the bonds that transcend individual existence." "Aurelius," Marcus shouted as Vaxhai's claws closed around the activation controls. "The harmonic resonance protocol we practiced now." The golden dragon, who had been standing ready near the chamber entrance, immediately understood. His massive voice joined with Harmony's crystal song, their combined frequencies creating patterns that had never existed before in galactic history. Dragon harmonics, evolved over millennia to resonate through mountain stone, merged with Valdoran empathy that could touch minds across impossible distances. The effect was immediate and startling. The Void Engine's dark heart flickered, as if confused, its reality warping energies encountering something it had no framework to process. The machine had been designed to consume individual consciousness, to feed on the thoughts and desires of single beings. It had no response for minds that thought as one, for bonds that transcended the boundaries of individual existence. Marcus felt the change instantly as his consciousness expanded beyond his own skull, merging with Aurelius's ancient wisdom and Harmony's empathic awareness. He was still himself, but he was also more than himself, part of a gestalt that included not just his immediate companions, but every member of their strike force spread throughout the excavation complex. Through this expanded awareness, he could feel Captain Morrison leading her team through the power generation centers, her bitter determination fueled by memories of family lost to Zephyrian raids. He sensed the other Dragon pilots holding their positions despite overwhelming enemy fire, their patience and courage creating the time needed for the mission to succeed. Most powerfully, he felt the millions of enslaved beings throughout the dig site, their individual suffering transformed into collective hope by the knowledge that someone had come to fight for them. Vaxhai activated the controls with a shriek of triumph. But instead of claiming ultimate power, he found himself facing something the Void Engine had never encountered before, a consciousness that existed in the spaces between individuals rather than within them. The machine's dark energies lashed out, seeking to consume the thoughts and desires that fed its existence, but found only bonds of love and loyalty that grew stronger under assault. Impossible! The Supreme Commander gasped as the Void Engine systems began to overload, their crystalline components cracking under energies they had no framework to process. The architects themselves could not control this device. How can mere primitives succeed where gods failed? Marcus smiled as he felt the consciousness of his dragon father flowing through his thoughts, offering strength and wisdom accumulated over centuries of existence. Because the architects were alone, he said simply. They had no one to share their burdens with, no bonds to transcend their individual limitations. They created a machine that reflected their isolation, powerful but ultimately self-destructive. The chamber filled with light as the Void Engine's containment systems finally failed, but instead of the reality-warping explosion that should have consumed half the galaxy, something entirely different occurred. The machine's dark heart flickered and went out like a flame deprived of fuel, its vast energies dissipating harmlessly into the quantum foam that underlied space-time. Vaxhai stared in horror at the dead controls, his dreams of ultimate power crumbling around him like ancient crystal. Around them, the sound of battle was fading as Zephyrian forces throughout the excavation found themselves facing coordinated resistance from their former slaves. The carefully organized oppression that had maintained their control was collapsing as millions of beings discovered they were no longer alone in their suffering. The collective will send more fleets, the Supreme Commander snarled, though his voice had lost its earlier confidence. You may have destroyed this weapon, but you cannot defeat the might of an entire empire. Marcus stood slowly, his consciousness still expanded beyond his individual self to encompass all those who fought for freedom throughout the galaxy. Through their shared awareness, he could feel the change already spreading beyond this single-star system. Word of their victory was traveling at quantum speeds through Valdoran empathic networks, reaching enslaved populations on countless worlds with a single, powerful message. Resistance was possible, hope was real, and freedom could be won. Your empire was built on the belief that isolated individuals are powerless against organized oppression, Marcus said as Zephyrian guards began to surrender throughout the complex, though the fight broken by the uprising of those they had tormented. But we've proven something you never understood. When different species choose to stand together, when they form bonds stronger than fear or hatred, no force in the galaxy can defeat them. The liberation of the Andronis excavation took 3 days as millions of enslaved beings worked together to dismantle the machinery of their oppression and coordinate their return to freedom. The Zephyrian fleet, designed to repel external attack, found itself helpless against internal revolution as their own slaves turned their industrial capabilities against their former masters. Marcus stood in the observation deck of the captured Zephyrian command ship, watching as refugee vessels prepared for the long journey home to dozens of worlds. Aurelius stood beside him, the ancient dragon's presence both physical and mental as their consciousness continued to flow together across the quantum resonance links that had saved the galaxy. The collective will not surrender easily, Aurelius observed, his voice carrying centuries of hard-won wisdom. This victory may have broken their expansion, but they still control hundreds of worlds and countless beings. Marcus nodded, his human eyes bright with the reflected glow of distant stars. Then we'll keep fighting, not as separate species competing for resources, but as allies working toward a common future. Every world they've conquered has populations that remember freedom. Every enslaved being they've oppressed has reasons to resist. We just showed them that resistance is possible. Through the quantum links, Marcus could feel similar uprisings beginning across the galaxy as word of their victory spread. On Kepler Station, human refugees were organizing supply lines to support liberation movements. In the vegan territories, alien species that had never trusted each other were forming unprecedented alliances. Throughout the galaxy, the example of dragons, humans, and Valdorans working together was inspiring others to believe that cooperation might triumph over conquest. The greatest change, however, was taking place on Draconis Prime itself. The dragon clans that had isolated themselves for centuries were emerging from their mountain strongholds, their ancient wisdom now focused on building rather than preserving. They had discovered that their knowledge gained power when shared rather than hoarded, and their strength multiplied when combined with the innovation and adaptability of younger races. 6 months later, Marcus stood once again at the great precipice where this journey had begun, but now he was not alone. Representatives from hundreds of species filled the crystalline caverns of his childhood home, their voices raised in languages from across the galaxy as they worked together to build something unprecedented, a true alliance of free beings, united not by conquest but by choice. The Galactic Liberation Front requests permission to establish supply bases in the Outer Rim territories, announced Ambassador Chun, a distant relative of Marcus's birth parents who had emerged from hiding when news of humanity's survival reached the refugee communities. With dragon cloaking technology and human rapid deployment tactics, we can support resistance movements in over 40 occupied systems. Aurelius rumbled approval, his golden scales catching the light of twin suns as they set over a world transformed. Granted, the dragon clans pledged their shipyards, their technology, and their knowledge to any species that chooses freedom over oppression. Marcus smiled as he watched his birth species and adopted family working side by side, their cooperation a living symbol of what the galaxy could become. The orphaned infant found in wreckage had grown into something the universe had never seen before, not just a bridge between species, but a catalyst for transformation that could reshape civilization itself. The Zephyrian Collective still controlled hundreds of worlds. Their military might remain formidable, and the path to true galactic freedom would require years of struggle and sacrifice. But the most important victory had already been won. The proof that different species could trust each other enough to share their greatest strengths, that love could transcend any biological or cultural divide, and that hope was stronger than fear when beings chose to stand together. The baby who had crossed the void seeking sanctuary had become the man who would lead the galaxy toward a future worth fighting for. And in the quantum resonance that linked minds across the stars, every free being in the galaxy could hear the dragon song of hope that promised tomorrow would be better than today. The age of isolation was ending. The age of alliance had begun. Far above the celebration, In the cold depths of space where light took years to travel between stars, radio signals carried news of the Andronis victory toward distant worlds where enslaved beings looked up at alien skies and dared to believe that freedom might be possible. On 1,000 worlds, in 1,000,000 hearts, the dragon raised humans' victory sparked flames of resistance that would burn until every chain was broken and every being could choose their own destiny. The galaxy would never be the same. And that was exactly what Marcus Chun, son of humanity and child of dragons, had intended all along.